The wind in Montana in the winter of 1882 was not just wind. It was something sharper. It cut through bone like a knife and screamed across the empty plains like a living thing. That afternoon, the storm came down from the northern mountains with a fury that erased the world. Snow swallowed the land. Sky and earth blended into one endless wall of white. The blizzard roared across the foothills like it meant to wipe every living soul from the map. Luke Callahan rode straight into it. Ice clung to his beard. The wind clawed through his heavy coat as if it were paper. Every breath burned in his lungs like fire. He was a man used to harsh winters. Life on a Montana ranch taught you that early. But this storm was different. This storm wanted blood. While Luke leaned low over his horse Bess as she pushed through snow that reached nearly to her chest. The animal snorted and fought against the wind, but she kept moving. Luke trusted the horse more than his own eyes now. The world had vanished. No trees, no hills, no sky. Only white. He had spent 4 long hours searching for his cattle herd in a small valley where they were supposed to shelter from the wind. When he finally found them, the sight left a heavy weight in his chest. 3 calves stood frozen solid where they had died. Another young steer was buried beneath a drift. The rest huddled together, backs turned to the wind, their bodies crusted in ice. There was nothing he could do for the dead ones. The land always took its share. Luke scattered the last of the feed he had carried on the mule and repaired the rough windbreak before turning back toward home. The light was fading fast now. The sky turned a dark purple through the storm clouds. Night would fall soon, and anyone caught outside after dark in weather like this would not last long. Luke's hands were numb inside his thick gloves. All he could think about was the warmth of the cabin fire, a pot of coffee boiling on the stove, 4 wooden walls strong enough to keep the storm outside. Then Bess stopped. The horse snorted hard and tossed her head. Her ears flattened against the wind. Luke frowned and pulled his scarf down from his mouth. "What is it, girl?" he muttered. But the horse refused to move forward. Luke squinted into the blowing snow. At first he saw nothing, but then he noticed a dark shape ahead. Something that did not belong in the endless white. He slid off the saddle, snow swallowing his legs to the knees. One hand rested on the revolver at his hip as he stepped forward slowly. The shape became clearer. It was a carriage, or what was left of one. A fine blue carriage lay tilted on its side like a broken toy. One wheel was shattered completely. The wood frame had splintered in several places. A trunk lay thrown open nearby. Silk dresses and fine linen spilled across the snow, whipping wildly in the wind like trapped birds. Luke's brow tightened. This kind of carriage belonged in a city street, not on a lonely ranch trail in the Montana wilderness. Nearby, a horse lay dead, its legs stiff in the air, half buried in snow. Luke scanned the area carefully. Then he saw them, drag marks. Someone had crawled away from the wreck. Luke followed the faint trail through the drifting snow for 20 yards. His heart beat slowly and heavily in his chest. Then he found her. A small, dark shape curled inside a snowdrift. She was half buried, face down in the snow. Luke dropped to his knees beside her and turned her over. His breath caught in his throat. She was young. Her face was pale blue with cold. Ice clung to her dark eyelashes. Her lips were cracked and nearly colorless. Her coat was fine dark wool, the kind worn by wealthy travelers, but it was torn open and useless against a Montana blizzard. Beneath it, he could see delicate lace from an expensive blouse. This woman did not belong out here. Luke pulled off one mitten, and pressed his fingers against her neck. Her skin felt like stone. For a long moment he felt nothing. Then, a faint flutter, a weak heartbeat. Once. Then again. Luke cursed under his breath. There was no time to think. He tore off his heavy coat and wrapped it around her frozen body. She weighed almost nothing when he lifted her. Getting her onto the horse was the hardest part. Beth shifted nervously as Luke struggled to lift the limp woman across the saddle. Finally, he managed it. He climbed up behind her and pulled her close against his chest. Her body felt dangerously cold. Dead cold. Luke tightened his arms around her and turned Bess toward home. The ride back to the cabin felt like the longest mile of his life. Snow struck his face like tiny needles. The wind howled in his ears. He bowed his head over the woman's frozen hair and whispered quietly, "Stay alive." The dark outline of his cabin finally appeared through the storm like a miracle. Luke stumbled from the horse and half carried, half dragged the woman inside. The door slammed shut behind them. Suddenly the storm was gone. Only silence remained. Luke laid her on the bearskin rug before the cold fireplace. His hands shook as he struck a match. The flame caught. Kindling cracked. Soon the fire roared to life. Warmth slowly filled the small cabin. Luke turned back to the woman. She still had not moved. Her breathing was faint, almost invisible. Luke grabbed his bottle of whiskey and knelt beside her. He lifted her head carefully and poured a few drops between her lips. She coughed weakly, but she swallowed. Luke exhaled slowly. "That's it," he muttered. "You fight now." Outside, the storm raged. But inside the cabin, two strangers clung to life beside the fire, and neither of them knew yet that the woman he had just pulled from the snow was the most powerful landowner in the entire territory. The blizzard did not stop for 3 long days. It howled around Luke Callahan's cabin like a wild animal trying to break in. Snow buried the door halfway up the frame. The single window rattled under the weight of ice. The world outside vanished completely. Inside, the cabin became their whole universe. Luke worked through the night after bringing her in. He cut away her frozen boots and stockings with careful hands. He turned his face aside as he removed her torn coat and damp silk layers. It felt wrong, but the cold would kill her if he did not. He wrapped her in every blanket he owned. He melted snow near the fire and rubbed her hands and feet gently, bringing life back to frozen skin. It was slow work. Painful work. Her fingers turned red, then deep purple. She winced even in unconsciousness. Near dusk, her eyes opened. They were the color of a winter sky. She gasped and tried to sit up, panic flashing across her face when she saw him. "Easy," Luke said, raising both hands. "You're safe." "Where am I?" Her voice was dry and weak. "My cabin. I found you in the snow near a wrecked carriage." Her eyes darted around the rough log walls, the rifle above the door, the scarred man sitting across from her. Fear filled her expression. "My carriage," she whispered. "The men. Were there men?" "Just you and a dead horse," Luke answered. She went quiet at that. Later, when she finally drank broth from a tin cup, she said her name was Anna. Luke knew it was not the truth, but he did not push her. Out here, a person had a right to their secrets. The second night was worse. The storm reached full fury. The wind struck the cabin like fists. Luke lay on the floor near the door, as was his habit, while she took the bunk. Sometime after midnight, she began to murmur in her sleep. "No, not his. It's not yours." Luke sat up. "Langley," she whispered clearly. "They took it. They took everything." He frowned. "Langley." That name was known across Montana, the largest ranch in the territory. Half the valley belonged to it. Before he could think more, she cried out and jerked awake, eyes wide with terror. He crossed the room and steadied her shoulders. "You're dreaming," he said firmly. "It's just the storm." Slowly, the panic faded, while she leaned against him, trembling. For a long moment, she stayed there, her head resting against his chest. Luke had not held another human being in years, but he did not move away. By morning, the storm still raged, and the lie began to crack. "My name is Victoria," she said quietly, while he fried salt pork at the hearth. "Victoria," he repeated. It fit her better than Anna. Over the next day, trapped inside the cabin, she spoke more. Her father had died 2 months ago. He had left her his ranch. A foreman named Morgan believed the land should be his instead. He claimed her father had promised it to him. When she refused to sign papers handing it over, trouble began. She had been traveling to Bozeman to file the will with the territorial marshal when armed men attacked her carriage. Luke listened without interrupting, but he knew about men like Morgan. He also knew about running. When she asked if he understood, he only said, "I know about gunfire and leaving places behind." That night, wolves circled the cabin. The howls were sharp and close. The mule brayed in terror from the lean-to shed. Luke grabbed his rifle despite the wound from the wolf bite that still ached in his arm. "Stay inside," he ordered her. He stepped into the blue twilight. Gunshots cracked through the snow. Snarls filled the air. Then Laos. When he returned, he was bleeding. A wolf had caught his arm before he killed it. Victoria did not panic. She cleaned the bite with whiskey, stitched it with his heavy needle, and wrapped it tight. Her hands were steady. Their eyes met in the firelight. Something shifted between them that night. Yet the storm finally broke on the third morning, but the danger had not. Luke rode to the ridge to check the valley entrance. From high ground, he saw them. 6 riders moving slowly through deep snow. Men. He followed at a distance and retrieved a leather saddle tag one of them dropped. The name burned into the leather made his jaw tighten. Morgan. Luke raced back to the cabin. 6 riders, he told her. "They'll be here by dark." She stared at the leather tag and went pale. "My name is Victoria Langley," she whispered finally. The truth settled heavily between them. She was not just any rancher's daughter. She owned the largest ranch in the territory, and Morgan wanted it badly enough to kill for it. By dusk, the riders surrounded the cabin. Morgan called out from the snow, "Send the woman out and you live." "Chet Callahan," Luke answered calmly from behind the log wall. "She's not coming out." Gunfire exploded. Logs splintered. One man fell to Luke's rifle. Another dropped at the doorway when Luke burst out and fired point blank. Victoria loaded cartridges with shaking hands, passing rifles back and forth as Luke shot. The cabin became a fortress. After 2 men lay dead in the snow, Morgan pulled his riders back. "This ain't over," he shouted into the frozen air. "We'll be back." When silence returned, Victoria stared at Luke. "You killed them," she whispered. "They came to kill you," he answered. He reloaded slowly, face hard. "I ain't no hero," he added quietly. "I've done this before." He told her then. Years ago in Kansas, he had shot a man in a dispute, a foreman, that he had fled north afterward and built his small ranch to disappear from the world. Victoria listened. She did not pull away. That night, in the dim glow of dying embers, she sat beside him as he kept watch. Their shoulders touched. Outside, 2 bodies froze beneath the stars. Inside, 2 survivors sat close enough to feel each other's breath. Neither of them knew yet how far this fight would go. Morning came cold and silent. The two dead men lay frozen outside Luke's cabin, half buried in snow. The sky was clear now, bright and cruel, as if the storm had never happened. But the fight was not over. "They'll come back," Luke said, his voice rough. Victoria stood near the hearth, pale but steady. "Then we don't wait for them here." He looked at her. She was no longer the frightened woman he had pulled from the snow. There was steel in her now. They could not stay in the cabin. Morgan knew where they were. "We go to your ranch," Luke decided. "It has walls, food, shelter. It's the one place he won't expect us to run toward." So they left. Luke buried the dead in deep snowdrifts without prayer. Then he packed what little food and ammunition he had left. Victoria climbed onto Bess, and Luke mounted behind her, despite the pain in his wounded arm. She wrapped her arms around his waist, holding tight as they rode into the white hills. The journey was brutal. Snow swallowed the trails. Wind cut through every layer of clothing. Luke's wolf bite burned hot with fever. The bullet wound in his shoulder throbbed with every step of the horse. Victoria felt his weakness growing, but she did not complain. They reached the Langley Ranch at sunset. The house stood large and silent in a wide valley. Smoke rose from the chimney. Morgan was inside. Luke hid the horses in an aspen grove near the barns. "You stay here," he told her. But she followed him anyway. They crept close enough to hear voices through the open parlor window. Morgan was laughing. "The girl died in that storm," he said. "Soon as the pass clears, I file the new will. Arthur Langley left the ranch to me." Victoria's hands tightened into fists. "They are erasing me," she whispered. Before Luke could stop her, she stepped out of the shadows. "Morgan!" she called. Her voice rang across the yard. The front door burst open. Morgan stood there with a rifle in hand, shock written across his face. Luke ran after her. The shooting started instantly. Luke fired first, dropping the man on the porch. Inside the parlor, chaos exploded. Another rider fell. Morgan shot back. A bullet struck Luke in the shoulder. He stumbled, blood spreading across his coat. Morgan laughed, stepping closer. "You again, Callahan," he sneered. "Still killing Foreman?" Victoria froze. "Foreman?" Morgan turned to her with a cruel smile. "This man killed your father's foreman 10 years ago. Shot Abe Selby dead. I replaced him after." The words shattered the air. Victoria looked at Luke. "You killed him?" she whispered. Luke's face was pale with pain. "It wasn't like that." Morgan raised his revolver to finish him. Victoria moved without thinking. She grabbed the iron poker from the fireplace and threw it hard. It struck Morgan's arm. His shot went wild. Luke lunged, tackling him, but he was too weak. Morgan threw him off and raised his gun again. Victoria dragged Luke out the door as bullets tore into the walls behind them. She hauled him through snow to the horses. He was barely conscious. They fled into the hills. That night, she held him in a hollow between pine trees. She tore strips from her dress to stop the bleeding. The wolf bite was black with infection. Fever burned through him. "You can't die," she whispered, cradling his head against her chest. He murmured broken words about Kansas and a fair draw. She stayed awake until dawn. When the first light touched the mountains, he was still breathing. They rode back at sunrise. Victoria no longer ran. She walked straight toward the ranch house with Luke's revolver in her hands. Morgan stepped onto the porch. "You came back to beg?" he mocked. "I am Victoria Elizabeth Langley," she said clearly. "This land is mine. Leave." Morgan laughed and raised his gun toward Luke, who staggered from the trees behind her, unarmed and bleeding. The shot came fast. Luke fell to the porch steps. Morgan turned his gun toward Luke's head. Victoria lifted the revolver. She remembered her father's voice. "Do not pull. Squeeze." She squeezed. The gunshot cracked through the valley. Morgan's smile vanished. He looked down at the spreading red on his chest. Then he fell forward into the snow. Silence followed. The remaining men fled. Victoria dropped the revolver and ran to Luke. He was alive. Barely. She dragged him inside the house. She cleaned the wounds with whiskey and wrapped them in clean linen from her mother's chest. She fought the fever for days, refusing to leave his side. When the territorial marshal finally arrived weeks later, and he found Morgan buried under rock and ice, and Victoria seated calmly at her father's desk with the ledger open. The forged will was in her hand. Luke sat on the porch, pale and broken, both arms damaged beyond full repair. "He saved my life," Victoria told the marshal, twice. The law declared the Langley Ranch hers. Spring came slowly. Snow melted. Rivers broke free. Green pushed through frozen ground. Luke healed, but not completely. His right arm never regained its strength. The fast draw he once relied on was gone. The wolf bite left his left arm scarred and tight. He was no longer the gunman he had been. Victoria rebuilt the ranch. Old hands returned. Fences were mended. Cattle filled the fields again. The house still carried bullet holes, but she refused to hide them. They were part of its story. Luke tried to leave one evening. He saddled Bess quietly in the barn. "I brought you nothing but blood," he said when she found him. "You brought me life," she answered. She took his broken hand and pressed it over her heart. "You stayed," she said softly. "That is enough." He did not leave. Months later, they rode together across golden hills in late summer. The land was alive again. He looked at her and shook his head with a faint smile. "Didn't know I was saving the richest woman in the territory." Victoria guided her horse closer until their knees touched. "You didn't," she replied gently. "You just saved me." They rode on beneath the wide Montana sky. Two survivors of winter. Two people who had faced death and chosen each other. And this time, neither of them was running.